Hello, I'm Esther Gidou. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. U.S. President Donald Trump launches a multi-front diplomatic blitz to end Russia's war in Ukraine. He says he will soon meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. A humanitarian crisis is looming in the Democratic Republic of Congo as the M23 rebels advance to South Kivu province. And Russian-born fashion designer Dasha Pomerantz tells stories with the clothing she creates, including a tribute to women forced to leave their native countries and start new lives in America. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. Following a successful prisoner swap with Russia, U.S. President Donald Trump is launching a multi-front diplomatic blitz to end the Ukraine conflict first. He says he will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin soon, and he's set to send a vice president-led team to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Friday. VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell reports.
President Donald Trump laid down his conditions for continued U.S. support for Ukraine as he set in motion a diplomatic charge aimed at ending Russia's nearly three-year invasion of the embattled country.
So we're getting security on our money. We're going to have it secured by, they have rare earth and they have oil and gas and they have a lot of other things. And we're asking for security on our money.
So does it mean you are not sending any
They've
more
agreed to it.
Ukraine
Has agreed to it.
You are not sending any more aid to Ukraine?
No, we are, but we want it secured, and the money is going to be secured.
U.S. lawmakers have approved nearly $183 billion for military and non-military support for Ukraine since February 2022, according to a new oversight report delivered to Congress on Wednesday. Just under $40 billion remains available. Trump's comments cap a whirlwind day of diplomacy, including calls between Trump and his Russian and Ukrainian counterparts. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed he and Trump had a long conversation. In a meeting Wednesday with the new U.S. Treasury Secretary over a potential economic deal, Zelensky stressed Ukraine's main demand in its peace plan, NATO membership for Ukraine, and its need for security guarantees.
And I asked President Trump to give us these security guarantees to help Ukraine, to strengthen us. Of course, we have to talk to Europe because we have to have an even bigger army. We have a budget deficit now, but to have an even bigger army, at least as big as it is now, and to feed an army is to have a big resource. This money has to come from somewhere. These are roughly the security guarantees.
Trump also said he would meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Saudi Arabia in the not-too-distant future. He expressed hope that Moscow's decision to swap American teacher Mark Fogel for a Russian cybercrime kingpin would lay a good path for negotiations to end the war. The Kremlin, speaking of the prisoner swap, said this.
Naturally, such agreements are preceded by very meticulous negotiating work. And of course, such agreements are unlikely to be able to become a turning point. But at the same time, bit by bit, these are certain steps to build up that very mutual trust, which is now at its lowest point.
Vice President J.D. Vance now heads from France to Germany, where he will head high-level U.S. talks with Zelensky on Friday in Munich as part of his first foreign trip in the role. Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.
Hundreds of world leaders and delegates are attending the Munich Security Conference this weekend, with conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East and simmering tensions in the Indo-Pacific on the agenda. As Henry Ridgwell reports, all eyes will be on the approach of the U.S. delegation under the new administration of President Donald Trump.
Ukraine's war against Russia's full-scale invasion is about to enter its fourth year. The conflict will top the agenda as hundreds of world leaders and delegates attend the Munich Security Conference starting Friday. It's the first major global summit for the new Trump administration in Washington.
We are very happy that we will have a strong representation of both the administration of the new American government there, as well as representation from Congress.
The US delegation includes Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Vance is scheduled to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky said this week he shared a common vision with the Trump administration.
Of course, there may be different opinions, but a common vision of the main things, of how to stop Putin and how to give guarantees of security to Ukraine and Ukrainians.
Washington wants a quick end to the war, but it's not clear how that might happen. In a Fox News interview Tuesday, President Trump said Ukraine, quote, may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday. Allies hope to maintain Trump's support for European and Ukrainian security, says analyst Charles Grant of the Centre for European Reform.
He hasn't threatened to pull out of NATO, hasn't said he's going to cut off all aid for Ukraine. One of the issues that will come up in Munich is to what extent the Europeans should help to keep the peace if there is a ceasefire in Ukraine.
Russia has not been invited to this year's Munich conference. Neither has Iran. China is sending a large delegation, with Asia-Pacific security also high on the agenda. This week, the US Navy sailed 2 warships through the Taiwan Strait, prompting an angry response from Beijing. China has ramped up military activity around Taiwan in recent months. China considers Taiwan a breakaway province. Taipei considers the island a sovereign state. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is due to hold a trilateral meeting with allies Japan and South Korea in Munich. Conflict in the Middle East will also top the agenda. Trump's repeated suggestion that Palestinians should leave Gaza and the United States take control of the territory has won support from Israel, but prompted strong criticism from other allies, notes Grant.
It's very disruptive and creates a lot of ill feeling between European and many other governments and the US.
Conflicts in Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo will also be discussed. Climate change, energy security and artificial intelligence will also be hot topics across the 3-day conference. Henry Ridgewell, VOA News.
U.S. Democratic lawmakers say the Trump administration's freeze of U.S. foreign assistance might permanently damage America's security and standing abroad. Republicans countered that the review of U.S. Agency for International Development programs is necessary to combat waste and fraud. VOA's congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson has the details.
Uncertainty around the world as the fate of U.S. foreign assistance programs is under review.
We are losing decades of experience and insight, deep relationships, effective interventions in some of the most dangerous and distant places on Earth, and we are betraying partners who have risked their place in their communities and countries by publicly aligning with us.
Experts told lawmakers during a panel discussion Wednesday that foreign aid represents less than 1% of the total U.S. budget, and pushed back against claims of wasteful spending.
USAID has been the target of a concerted campaign of disinformation led by Elon Musk and amplified by the President of the United States. They have deployed a fire hose of falsehoods to slander an agency whose mission is fundamental to advancing America's interests in the world.
Republicans have defended the work of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, led by billionaire Elon Musk, saying attempts to stop fraud and waste are long overdue.
USAID is an agency that let us all down. I've been advocating for soft power for my entire time up here. And what I have seen makes me sick to my stomach.
The Trump administration has granted waivers allowing some aid programs to resume, although Democratic senators questioned on Wednesday if this was happening on the ground.
It's not us just going in and doing things willy-nilly. It's in partnership with the agency heads, and I check frequently with the president to make sure that this is what the president wants to happen.
Development assistance supports more than 100,000 jobs in the United States. One of the thousands of USAID employees suddenly without work said the consequences of even a temporary stop to some U.S. assistance will be long-ranging.
We work not by forcing people to have respect for America or by telling people to have certain values, but by supporting them in the ways that they feel that they need.
U.S. contractors and non-governmental organizations are suing the Trump administration over the freezing of U.S. aid funds, saying it is an unconstitutional use of presidential power. Republicans say Trump is simply exerting his authority. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
Uganda's opposition figure Kizza Besigye is on trial in a military tribunal in Kampala, and he's on a hunger strike, according to his wife and lawyer. This after the country's top court banned court-martial from trying civilians. Besigye was detained in Kenya in November in what a senior Kenyan Foreign Affairs official described as an abduction. He was subsequently returned to Uganda and charged with illegal possession of firearms and treachery, which carries the death penalty. For more insight, I'm joined from Nairobi, Kenya by Roland Ebole, regional researcher for Tanzania and Uganda at Amnesty International. Roland, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
I understand you visited Besigye in prison recently. What were your observations?
Yes, I visited Kizza Besigye in prison last week, and the observation is that he was very encouraged by the solidarity that came through from Kenyans, from Tanzanians. You would know that the lead counsel in Kizza Besigye's case is Honorable Martha Karua, who is a Kenyan top politician, opposition politician. But also a lawyer. And, having us around in this region.
And what were, Roland, what were the main takeaways from your conversation with him?
From our conversation, one, he recounted how the military court system was introduced in Uganda back in 2005. He was the first one to be tried under that military tribunal, and hopefully he should be the last one to be tried by that court, considering the Supreme Court decision on 31st of January. So hopefully, after his release, we will not see that travesty of justice whereby civilians are tried in military courts.
And Roland, what does he hope will change now that he is on hunger strike?
So it is really interesting because one, with the Supreme Court decision being very clear in terms of all charges or ongoing criminal trials or pending trials before the court martials to immediately cease, meaning that everyone that is being charged under that system should actually be freed, especially if they've challenged the system. You see a situation whereby the politics of Uganda, and I think the executive does not want to release Kizza Besigye. This week, he was not able to appear in court and say that he was unwell. And this hunger strike really creates a situation whereby his health is really deteriorating very fast. And, it is a call basically that, the Ugandan authorities should respect court decisions and freeing Kizza Besigye. He is not alone. Kizza Besigye was abducted alongside Obey Lutale, who is an FDC, a Forum for Democracy and Change party member. And they have been held since then in Luzira prison. You would also know that his lawyer, one of his lawyers, Aaron Kizza, was arrested for contempt of court after he was being prevented from accessing defense benches to represent his client. And he's currently serving 9 months imprisonment in Kitalia prison, where he was convicted for contempt of court. I also visited him, and for his case, it is a different case of a third situation where the authorities in Uganda are trying to stop or targeting lawyers from doing their work.
Roland, many thanks for your insight into this and visiting Besigye so you can tell us exactly what is going on there. Roland Ebole is a regional researcher for Tanzania and Uganda at Amnesty International. The advance of the M23 rebels into East Congo's South Kivu province could trigger a humanitarian catastrophe in an under-resourced area already housing thousands of displaced people, according to the provincial governor Jean-Jacques Purusi Sadiki. Meanwhile, the United Nations says humanitarian efforts in eastern Congo have been severely hampered by widespread looting and the closure of Goma Airport. VOA's Philip Alexiou has our report.
The Tutsi-led rebels have been moving south after seizing East Congo's largest city of Goma at the end of last month, gaining more ground despite military pushbacks and mediation efforts. The escalation of a decade-old insurgency in East Congo is stoking fears of a broader regional war and displaced thousands more people in an area already scrambling to support hordes of uprooted civilians, many of which have fled more than once. South Kivu Provincial Governor Jean-Jacques Purusi Sadiki.
Yes, we are fearing a humanitarian catastrophe should the war attend this place. It will be really a big tragedy in the sense that North Kivu has a lower population compared to South Kivu. South Kivu we are turning around 2,800,000 citizens, whether Goma is less than 1 million.
Days of violence that preceded the capture of Goma left some 3,000 people dead, overwhelming hospitals with casualties and severely hindering humanitarian operations in the city. UN Humanitarian Coordinator for Congo, Bruno Lemarquis, says millions of dollars worth of medical supplies, food, and other essentials have been stolen. And the airport in Goma, the closure there only just makes things worse.
Notamment du fait de la fermeture de l'aéroport de Goma.
For us, the airport is a lifeline. It must reopen so we can evacuate severely injured patients, bring in supplies, especially medical equipment and medicine, and deploy specialized personnel, including emergency responders.
National Defense Forces, the FRDC, have been reinforced, according to Purusi Sadiki. He says equipment has been provided and new troops have been released on the front line.
We have now very strong positions. We have been attacked in the Kalehe territory since last night. We have been fighting in several locations with the enemy, Rwandese forces with the backup. M23 has been fighting us for quite a long time. And we know that they have a lot of support from other countries, several countries.
Rwanda has been accused by Congo, the United Nations, and several Western countries of supporting the rebels with thousands of its own troops and weapons. It denies this and says it is acting in self-defense. A ceasefire declared by the rebels for humanitarian reasons at the start of February rapidly crumbled. Adding to the expansive fighting and the challenges for aid agencies, Lemarquis also warns of a looming funding crisis, with Congo heavily dependent on U.S. aid that has been recently cut.
Mais sur ce 1,3 milliard de dollars, 910 millions venaient de l'aide américaine. Donc on est...
Out of the $1.3 billion in humanitarian aid, $910 million came from the U.S., meaning we are 70% dependent on it. This makes Congo the most aid-dependent country in the world, and replacing that funding will be extremely difficult.
Lemarquis says the consequences are already being felt, as several partners have had to pause their projects and finding alternatives will be extremely challenging. Philip Alexiou, VOA News, Washington.
U.S. President Donald Trump announced on the social media website Truth Social that he will cut off all aid to South Africa until further notice, citing the country's land reform policy. This follows an executive order he signed to reduce U.S. financial assistance due to disapproval of South Africa's land policy and its genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. VOA's Paul Ndiho interviewed Maropeng Mpia, a political commentator in Johannesburg, for further perspective.
I don't think the amendments in the Act go far. They only deal with the cosmetics of land redistribution. We shouldn't be speaking about land redistribution. We should be speaking about what does it mean to say land justice. There's nowhere in South Africa where we will say we'll take the land back from white South Africans to the exclusive of black people and we will draw them to the sea. There's no such a thing. they will continue, they will have land tenure rights. They will continue to farm. Those land that are not being used effectively are the ones that can be expropriated for public use in the public interest. It is clear. The act is clear.
Your president has gone on record to say that South Africa and South Africans will not be bullied or to succumb to this kind of demand from the United States.
The simple matter is, as we sit in South Africa, white people are the majority farmers who produce the food for us. As we speak, America and its allies are our biggest traders. So when we say we will not be bullied, what are we going to do? There's nothing else that we can do at this point. We have wasted 30 years in not cultivating proper independence where we can sustain our own economies. South Africa's economy is within the hands of multinational corporations and white South Africans. So he can speak tough all he wants. The fact of the matter is, if white people pull out of South African economy, blacks will suffer. So anyone can tell me what they want to do and try to insult Trump and act all tough. The fact of the matter is they cannot back up their toughness simply because our capitalist economy is intrinsically linked to that of the West, and you don't have any policy maneuvering.
That was Maropeng Pia, a political commentator in Johannesburg. He spoke with VOA's Paul Ndiho. Still to come, a Russian-born fashion designer tells stories with the clothing she creates. We'll be right back.
In today's digital world, smartphones and social media have revolutionized the way we communicate, and dating is no exception worldwide, including Africa. Online dating platforms and social networks have created new opportunities for people to connect, breaking down traditional geographic and social barriers. On the next episode of Our Voices, we'll explore how men and women first connect through digital platforms and whether these connections can turn into lasting relationships. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In other news, public universities in Malawi are ordering all students sponsored by USAID to drop out or seek other sources of funding if they want to remain in school. This follows the 90-day freeze on U.S. foreign assistance recently announced by U.S. President Donald Trump. However, Malawi's government says it is working to ensure that students can continue their education. Zimbabwean Finance Minister Mthuli Ncube says the government will compensate foreign investors who lost assets in the country's controversial land reforms in the early 2000s, but were protected by the Bilateral Investment Protection Agreement. The country will pay 94 former farmers from countries such as Switzerland, Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, and the former Yugoslavia. And Congo's largest church organizations have met with the M23 rebels in the country's east to advocate for peace and dialogue after weeks-long fighting. The meeting comes weeks after the M23 rebels moved into Goma, the region's largest city, and captured it before advancing deeper into the neighboring South Kivu province. Russian-born fashion designer Dasha Pomeranz tells stories with the clothing she creates. Her latest collection is a tribute to women who were forced to leave their native countries and start new lives in the United States. Karina Bafrajozian has the story.
For the past 3 years, Russian-born fashion designer Dasha Pomerantz has split her time between New York and Washington. Before that, she had spent over 11 years in London after moving there from Moscow. It was her life in the United States, however, that inspired her to create a new collection dedicated to immigration and women.
I realized I'm surrounded by immigrant women. My kids' friends' parents, my colleagues, they all had these amazing life stories. So I decided to collect them and turn them into skirt designs.
Pomerantz's latest collection of skirts, The Threads of Migration, is dedicated to some of the immigrant women she has met during her life in the U.S. Among them is an Ethiopian journalist who was arrested while covering elections at home, a Jewish woman from the Soviet Union escaping anti-Semitism, a Bolivian woman who grew up with domestic violence. One of the skirts was inspired by Vera Lyalko, an immigrant from Kyiv who moved to the U.S. in the late 1990s and now provides support to her fellow Ukrainians back home as they fight to hold ground against Russian forces.
Dasha found out I have a foundation called Help Citizens of Ukraine. Through this foundation, I help Ukrainians, mostly with medication. I work with a number of hospitals here, and they give me medications I can donate to Ukraine.
Virginia-based Afghan artist Sugra Husseini also shared her story with Pomerantz. In Kabul, Husseini advocated for women's rights and access to education. But in 2016, she started receiving threats and decided to leave Afghanistan for the U.S.
The Taliban that is in power right now, even that time, they was not happy with my activity, my art activity, and then talking about women and women's rights, and then they wanted to kidnap me, kill me, and then to be a good example for other people or for other women.
Pomerantz is working to add more stories and designs to her collection as she prepares for a spring fashion show in New York.
There will be women from Haiti talking about what had happened there. It's incredible, learning people's stories. There will be Somali women telling their stories too.
Pomerantz does more than share immigrant women's stories. Part of the proceeds from online sales of her designs go to various foundations supporting refugee women. Corinne Befradjian, VOA News, Washington.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.